This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 176.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba.
What's up, SE Nation? Welcome back to another episode. If you don't know me, my name is Ramsey Majaba. I am your host. Usually with me is my co-host, Benny, but he will be part of the interview, just not right now. And I'm a sales engineer out of Ottawa, Canada, hybrid. So I do both sales and sales engineering. And I've been finding myself coaching people recently. And usually these are people that want to invest in themselves. Why do you want to invest in yourself? Because you get options. When I graduated university in 2009, it was a horrible time for people graduating, well, pretty much from any kind of field, because it was a bad time for everybody. And it took me 4 months to even get an interview. When they offered me the job, I just took it. There was no questioning it. It's not like, oh, I want to wait for something better. No, you take it. You're a new grad, no experience. You take whatever you can get. And as you get older, you learn that you can actually choose. You have the right to choose. You have the right to pursue things that people may think that may not fit you. And by doing that, when you're pursuing things, you're going into interviews. And that's the topic of today, how we interview the interviewers. We talk with Akshat Srivastra, who is one of the founders of SENY. He's been on the show before. I'll have links to his show in the show notes, as to his previous shows on the show notes. He interviewed me in one of the shows though. So yeah, and I have a great relationship with SENY, great organization with different, I guess, territories. They have one in SE Toronto, SE Boston, SE Sydney. He'll talk about them. But we talk about interviewing the interviewers. You're not just there to answer their questions. You're a sales engineer. You have to ask questions to make sure that you are a good fit, or you even want the job, or what are they looking for. So that's what we discussed with Akshat today, how you can interview the interviewers. It's based on a blog that he has on his show, on his website, SENY. Link to that in the show notes as well. So if you want to check out all these links, wethesalesengineers.com/show 175. And let's go talk to Akshat. What's up, Akshat? Long time no see. We spoke, but long time no see. How you doing?
Long time no see. I am doing great. The pandemic has been pretty interesting. We're post-pandemic now, and we're all the way into, I don't know, Delta variant, and hopefully everyone is safe out there. We've certainly been lucky in New York to at least see some sort of a normal winter. People are out and about. We had an event with SENY in July, so looking forward to how the year goes. But wishing everyone who's listening that they're safe and healthy.
Thanks, man. I actually watched the SENY. It was live in person, so I wasn't able to attend live, but you guys have the replay. So I enjoyed watching that. I enjoyed the role play that Eric had to participate in. So
yes.
So you've been on the podcast a couple different times. You've been on show 66, one of the earlier shows. It's been a couple of years. And then you interviewed me on this podcast on show 121. So if people want to learn more about Akshat and SENY, or SE Nation organization, which I love, by the way, the name SE Nation for some reason.
It's your name, right?
Well, it's not my name. It's just what I call everybody in the SE Nation, and you guys are part of it, and I'm part of your SE Nation. So I'm glad we're part of one nation. I'm not going to say nation anymore today. Can you give us like a 30-second overview of who you are, what you do, and how you came to be here?
Absolutely. So I'm a solutions architect for the enterprise with AWS. That is a pre-sales role. Prior to that, I have worked in companies like mParticle. I was a solutions engineer for enterprise as well. My journey started with the sales engineering, solutions engineering at AppDynamics. I was there for 3.5 years. And really, a lot of what I know about the pre-sales role and different customers, meeting prospects, the whole being in the pre-sales role is thanks to AppDynamics. And since then, I've never looked back. So yeah, I live in New York City. I also founded something called the Sales Engineers of New York, or SENY, which is a community of pre-sales engineers in the New York City area. And we have a Slack, we have a meetup. So that's what I do.
I love your Slack channel. For Slack, like we're doing a shameless plug here. Is it just people from New York that can join, or anybody can join?
As you said, we're not going to use the word SE Nation, but SENY is just a part of SE Nation overall. We have cities like Toronto, Austin, DC, Boston, Sydney. Those are the other five cities besides New York. We have in Canada, we have Kerry Sokulski and Tony Meadows, who are leading the Canada charge. So if you have other cities in Canada who wants to kind of join this trend, let me know. We're gonna we can definitely help you out, and I can put you in touch with Kerry and Tony, who are doing an excellent job in Canada.
Yeah, so both Kerry and Tony have been on the podcast. Kerry was on there like recently, and I'm trying to figure out the basics of 132 is for Tony, I believe, Tony Matos, and he's the author of the book about proof of concepts, which is great. So anybody can join, and anybody can actually participate and maybe create their own SE, whatever location they are, and you guys are there to support them because you've done this so many times. But we're not here to talk about SENY. We're here to talk about the blog that you wrote about on SENY.
Absolutely, yeah.
So just before we jump there, App Dynamics, were you part of it before Cisco bought it or after?
Yeah, I was part of it before Cisco bought it. I remember the day when Cisco bought it.
That's when you left? Did you leave right after, or did you stay through the merger and all that?
I stayed through the merger. I stayed a year after it was bought.
All right. If we have time, I'd like to come back to that and see the difference between startup and being purchased by a big company and then working there. But let's talk about the blog that you wrote. It is called Interview Your Interviewer to Pick the Best SE Job. And you can find that on SENY, salesengineersnewyork.com, ny.com. We'll have a link to that in the show notes as well. And I always tell people, like, when you're interviewing for a job, it's not just them interviewing you, you're interviewing them as well. But you articulated it very well here. What made you come to the realization that you're interviewing them just as much?
You know, I'll tell you about my journey. So when I was in App Dynamics, right, right around the 3.5-year mark, I was like, you know what, I need to kind of look at jobs, right? I need to start interviewing and see what's out there. Of course, I didn't want to leave at that point, but at the same time, I wanted to continue in my career and kind of continue my career trajectory. So, you know, I interviewed at a lot of places. And what happens is with each interview, and even when you're interviewing within your organization, you improvise, right? You take notes. So at the end of the, so this is about, like, I would say 5 years ago, or maybe yeah, about 5 years ago. When I was actually, yeah, it's probably more like maybe 3 years ago. So after every interview, right, after every interview, they always ask me, what are your questions? What do you have questions on? And I used to take notes. So I ended up compiling a lot of notes. And what happened is, you know, a year and a half into AWS, I'm kind of settled in. I'm not interviewing, of course, not looking or anything like that. And I was looking at my list, and I was like, you know, this list needs to be shared with a lot of folks. Now, part of SENY is a mentorship channel. We have a mentors channel where a lot of new folks are interviewing, or they need help with, you know, someone who can mentor them through interviews, through how to be an SE. And people ask me, like, hey, what questions should we ask others? And I happened to share this list that I had. And you know, one of the person I was mentoring, they're like, hey, this could be this should be shared with others. And I'm like, you know what, I want to write a blog about this. So in that sense, that's how this originated. I'll get a step beyond. When you are interviewing at companies that are not publicly traded, that are startups, you tend to be more inquisitive in your questions, because every person who's joining a startup wants to join a startup because of the equity component of that company, right? It's because of the options, or the stock options that you might be given. Now it's very hard to put a value on those, besides whatever they tell you, they tell you that the value is. But you're kind of buying into a vision. You're kind of buying into a hopeful exit plan. And when you're interviewing for those kind of startups, whether it's 100-person startup or a 500-person startup, that's when those questions that I wrote become more interesting. I can dig deeper into each of the sections of the questions, but yeah, that's a very short overview of why and how I came with the topic.
I just want to add, like, it's not just startups. Like, startup with more advanced or more established companies, you can get some information from other places. Startups usually don't have enough SEs for you to connect with and talk to. At least that's how I see it.
Or even on top of that too, like I feel like a lot of organizations don't even necessarily have the best sense of how SEs can be leveraged. So certainly smaller organizations, but larger organizations as well, that may have, let's say, a sales leader kind of hear about this like technical salesperson they should have augment their sales team. And so they hire on a sales engineer or solutions architect or whatever title they decide to throw on it. And then they don't really have the best plan for that person besides being, let's say, a demo jockey, or assist your sales reps in closing these deals, and that's your role. But the questions you have here are awesome, and that, like, they're really indicative of I guess wanting to build, or just really wanting to understand what a sales engineering organization looks like within any other organization, and really adds legitimacy and credibility to not only the person asking the question, but even just the role as a whole, because it speaks to the fact that, I mean, SCs are looking for all these things, which are, I guess we go into them later, but these are all like real things that are needed for true, not even just growth or like job satisfaction, but also growth. And I don't know, it just speaks to it being a real organization rather than just a role, which is really cool.
And before we jump in there, you mentioned taking notes during an interview. Now, I've heard a lot of people is like, oh, I don't take anything with me. I just come in and have a conversation. I don't have anything to take notes on. Right now with virtual world, you can do whatever you want. I'm wearing shorts right now with a nice t-shirt on top, so no one can tell what you're doing. What are your thoughts about actually going into like interviews, having a notebook there and taking notes? Good thing, bad thing?
No, it's absolutely not a bad thing. I mean, I have interviewed other folks, and whoever walks in person with a notebook, I will never judge them. Be like, oh, why is this person walking with a notebook? So it's not a bad thing for sure. It really depends on an individual. Some people have photographic memory, so you can remember what happened in an interview. So a lot of times when I said I took notes, I'm not saying that I physically wrote down the questions I was asking. It was more like immediately after the interview, I went back and kind of wrote down those questions, and it was as easy as pulling out my cell phone and going into the Apple Notes app and literally writing a lot of those questions. Because of necessity, I had to maybe interview another week, or I knew that I'm interviewing with another company. Let me write down this question. This question was good. And certainly I always try to, if in person, right, take a notebook with me, so that if there's a question I don't know the answer, or I write it down. Just like an SE, we are SEs. We are used to talking to customers. This is a regular meeting. This is just them interviewing you. So there's no reason to treat it differently, right?
So you said you wouldn't judge anybody who comes in with a notebook. I would judge people who don't come in with a notebook. Well, think about it. It's a sales cycle. If you're going to meet customers, let's say you're like in sales, you try to meet all the customers in one shot and have one meeting. But sometimes it doesn't happen, and you're meeting one after another, and sometimes you have to refer to what someone else said. Like, hey, I know I was talking to John earlier. He said this was important to him. Is this important to you? How do you see that topic? But yeah, you kind of have to have that note somewhere in front of you. If you can remember all of it and go out and write down, but you were writing down the questions they asked you, not necessarily part of the conversations that happened, right? after the fact. During the interviews, I'm writing down almost everything that they say. Like, oh, it's the salary split is like this. This is the salary range, so that if it ever comes back and they say, oh, we said the salary range is between 100 and 150, we're going to offer you 90. I'm like, no, you said it's between 100 and 150, and I emphasized that I'm looking for 150. So
I try to have those conversations before with the recruiter or after they have made an offer. So usually I'm on the phone and not in person for those kind of conversations.
Yeah,
that's why. Yeah, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah, like you have to take notes, and that's what I'm saying. Like you're having a conversation at the start that will come to fruition during your last call. You're gonna have to remember the things that happened in between. And if you have photographic memory, I'm happy for you, but I highly doubt it. Not many people have that. More normal mortals tend to need to take notes, and we forget a lot of stuff.
Absolutely.
Okay. I do want to ask a quick question. I don't know if it has to do with maybe my lack of experience in the world. So hopefully I could grow an extra wisdom hair in my beard here. Over time, I've only been in the space for maybe like, I don't know, a decade, a little bit less than that, I guess. I think it's probably fair, and correct me if I'm wrong, to say that employers nowadays probably expect more from interviewees rather, just in the way of knowing about things, whether it be research on the industry, on their company, on the competition, just because of the internet and things like that. But this whole idea about interviewers or interviewees rather, as much as they're being interviewed for a role or they're being interviewed for a role, they're also interviewing the employer for kind of judging whether or not it's a good fit for them. I don't know, the whole idea of like work-life balance and like, I don't know, more millennial ways of doing things, I guess, and not being so hard-headed corporate wise. I don't know, it seems to all fit very well in line with that. And that, you're not just being interviewed for a job, you're also looking to make sure the employer's a good fit for you. Has that always been the case, or is that really something that's just starting to come up more nowadays?
I think there's a really good book, the SE Manager's Handbook by John Kerr, and in that book there's a chapter on he talks about radar. How do you retain basically how do you retain employees? How do you attract talent? And I'm not gonna mention what radar means. You have to read the book for that. One of the chapters he talks about as a SE manager, right? What are the different folks that you will have as teammates or people who report to you in terms of generations? And he starts with the with different generations and what they went through. And there's a chart where it says what are they looking for. So baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, and the next generation I believe is Alpha generation. We're not gonna work with them right now, but it's about each generation has had its own set of world experiences and the way they look at a role. So if you ask me 15 or 20 years ago, was this normal? I would say in the way interviews are conducted has changed as well. If you look at what happened in Japan, right, over the years, like you were expected to be with one company, and for a long, for what it is, even now, I would say baby boomers who are still in the industry, they feel loyal to that one company. You retire with that company. That is your life. Things have changed in Japan as well. If you look at how trends have changed with the millennials now, that loyalty factor is not there, and there's the focus is back on work-life balance, on your own career trajectory, as well as what is the employer kind of doing for you as well, and not just you for the employer. It's a two-way relationship. So, having said that, the way interviews happen and are conducted has changed as well. You also see a lot of companies. There's a company called Biometrics, I believe, that uses games for matching employees. So you kind of play games and kind of see if there's a behavioral fit. So there's a lot of there's certainly a market for that, right? The way recruiting is done has changed. The other factor that is very, common to sales engineering, I would say, or kind of peculiar for SEing world, is that we are in a situation. I write about this in my article. Is that we are still a very niche industry with more demand than supply. There's more demand for SE jobs than there are SEs who are experienced. The challenge with the SE hiring is everyone wants an SE with 2 to 3 years minimum experience. Now, there's a very limited pool for that. Once you have an SE job, we all started as an SE at some point in our career, and certainly it was not the first job for me. So someone, had faith in me to hire me as an SE without any SE experience. So I think your academy, Ramsey, or the classes that you're doing with Chris White, those kind of things, I have a lot of hope in, and whatever I can do to kind of promote that for all these new kids who are, right out of college, I would certainly think that that would give them the edge. But I also want to encourage employers out there to look at people without any SE experience, because those folks sometimes come in and they are probably the best SEs that you can groom into. So I think this trend is there to continue because the shortage is not going to be filled for long. And as us SEs grow in our careers, I feel like we become more selective as to the opportunities that we want. We tend to ask more questions because you know what, we have seen through things. We have been through situations that we don't want to be repeated. So it kind of, I'm not saying that this is the way it should be. I'm just saying we are the product of our experiences, and we just don't want to repeat those things, whether it's to dealing with some problematic sales reps, for instance, or it has to be with selling a product that we weren't passionate about. Whatever it is, all of us always try to look out for, and I'm talking about us who are experienced and who care about our craft and our career. So I hope that answered the question.
So I was waiting for you to say that the more experienced you are and the more selective you are, the more questions you can ask and the more you were wanted. Like now that you have more power in your hands, but when you're starting in your career, I don't think I asked a single question about like, oh, how is my career gonna look like in 5 years when I first joined Alcatel-Lucent, for example. It's just, hey man, I've been out of the job for 4 months. Just please give me a job. That was the relationship there, and I had no power. And as you get older and you start being able to pick what you want to do, you start asking those questions because I don't have to leave my current company. I'm okay there. There are some reasons that are making me look elsewhere, but I'm not necessarily having to jump right now. If you're desperate, you notice that you're gonna go back to just give me the job, man. Just give me the job, and then I'll look for something else. I love that, actually, and thanks for the plug.
On top of that too, also just like knowing, like being in the SC role, I think you mentioned it yourself, that the idea that the SC role is still kind of a new emerging role in some respects. I mean, it's growing without a doubt, but still relatively new. And so for those that have never even been an SC before the opportunity is presented to them to become one, or even as that opportunity comes up, a lot of them don't know what the role really entails, I guess. Like, sure, there could be a job description, but I mean, for myself, like knowing the intricacies of an AE SC relationship, or I don't know, different ways about how an SC interacts with the rest of the organization, or even what doors are open for that to take place. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you both hit it right on the head. Just the idea of that experience kind of opens up those doors. And the nice thing too about the questions that you asked there is that it kind of gives somebody that's new a little bit of a leg up with respect to, what are the types of questions I should be asking as an SE, even if I have no visibility to any of these things. I mean, these are clearly things I probably should start to care about a little bit. And, as time goes on, you'll start to understand why they matter more and more, but just knowing is the first step. So I think that's excellent.
Absolutely. And one other thing I want to kind of add, if you have read the blog article, you'll see that the questions are the way they're written. They are in three sections, right? Questions to ask sales, questions to ask, product or technical folks, and questions to ask your hiring manager and their bosses. The reason I came up with those three different sections is because of a general trend of folks that I saw that interviewed me, usually for an SE job. Now, it is your responsibility as an SE to ask the recruiter what is your hiring process. It differs for different companies. If you're gonna get hired for, one of the FANG companies, right? The big tech companies, they have a very defined hiring process. You're gonna meet with a recruiter. You're probably gonna have a technical round, and then you're gonna meet multiple hiring managers before you can get a offer. For a smaller company, this might be different. For a very small startup, you might just end up meeting with 3 or 4 folks, and you get the offer. But most certainly, you will meet with a sales leader right? And this sales leader would be either the sales rep that you would be paired up with, or their boss, or the CRO, depending on or how big the company is. The sales leader will question you on your sales acumen and whether this person is going to be a pain to work with or easy to work with. Are they coachable or not? Do they understand how to talk to customers? Some companies that really require the sales chops will judge this person will kind of measure you on the capabilities of like, okay, does this person get too much into the technical details, or does this person have the um, ability to really what's the right word,
Summarize or high enough.
summarize or explain a very complex technical concept in easy terms. So some sales leaders will measure you on that. Now the product and technical folks, once I was interviewed by a senior engineer, and they really look at your resume, and their job will be to determine whether this person knows what they write on their resume. I have been a part of many interviews, like as in like I've interviewed a lot of folks, right, in my career. I would say like 40 at least. And I usually do the technical round interviews. What I usually look for is okay, if you have written something on your resume, let me question that. So those kind of things. And in terms of the SE measurement and career growth, I would say, sir, save those questions until you have established that you have a good shot at getting this job. People have given you feedback, and you are in the final kind of stages of, all right, you know what, they're probably going to make me an offer, or maybe after you've already got an offer. A lot of those questions for the SE measurement and career growth, I have actually asked after being given a verbal offer and before, signing anything. So that's how I wrote those sections.
Okay. I know Ramsey has a really good question that I don't know. I did put in something that's just related to something that you just mentioned there. My apologies, Ramsey, if I could quickly ask this one.
Go ahead.
Thanks.
I've done it to you.
Thanks. Just because you mentioned it just now around, testing people on their knowledge on what they have on their resume. I mean, that makes sense to do, right? Have you ever caught anybody, like, don't get into specifics or anything, but have you ever, or do you ever, or is it often that you catch people red-handed in exaggerating what they know or their accomplishments, or do people ever lie that you catch them in?
All the time.
Really? Oh, wow.
Well, so here's the thing. There's a problem with the way the resumes are read these days. Like, you have to match 98% with the automated system for you to get in the door. So you may have, let's say they want JavaScript experience. You may have used JavaScript once, and that means, and you use it successfully. That means you can learn it again, but you're not an expert in it right now. And the way I see a lot of resumes written today are like bullet points. Like, I do JavaScript, I know Red Hat, I know this and that. They don't qualify how much knowledge they have. So if I'm writing a resume and I see like they need JavaScript, and I've used a program called JavaScript, I would say familiar with JavaScript. And then when I get into the interview, it's like, oh, you know JavaScript. Like, yeah, I wrote a program once using JavaScript. It's been a while. I'm sure I can brush up on it and learn it again pretty quickly. But if you ask me a question right now, I probably won't be able to answer you to the best of my abilities, right? So there are ways of doing things that where you're not lying. At least that's my opinion. What do you think, Akshat?
No, 100%. And you know what? When I said people, when Bini asked me, the question, I'm not saying that I picked up on a technology and then asked me like, okay, well, can you write a program in JavaScript that goes and does a Fibonacci sequence of numbers? No, as an SE, you're not going to do lead coding. You're not going. In most cases, you might get a demoing challenge or like, hey, install the product and demo it back to us. That's different.
Yep.
But in my experience, in the interviews I've done, I would say 10 at least, something like that in the past few years. And I haven't been asked to code or kind of being challenged on a software developer question. Now, what I'm talking about is even when you write, let's say, familiar with JavaScript, or if you write like, hey, I helped in this deal and closed the biggest deal or something like that, you better have a story to follow that. whatever you're writing on your resume should be something that you're able to answer. If I just pick up a question, like if I know stories are like they're like people have written saying we helped in establishing the networking component of a data center. Okay, that there's no technical details, but if I'm asking you, okay, so what did you do? How did you do this? Can you talk a little bit about within 30 seconds to 2 minutes, you know whether this person actually did it or they're writing it down. So you see how it really depends on that. So some people do write familiar with. So if I say to your question, uh, what did you do in JavaScript? If you're familiar now, if you actually never wrote, you're gonna start mumbling and Google. But if you did, you're gonna be at least able to tell me that, oh yeah, it was a small program, like some front end script. It did this. I don't really remember, but I know. Okay, yeah, he did.
So they're flat out lying at that point, right? It's not like exaggerating or.
Well, there are levels of exaggeration and lying.
That's such a salesperson thing to say. As sales engineers, it's lying, and it's not lying. But yeah, I get that. Some people actually embellish what they've done with it. Like okay.
I would say that by the time somebody's looking at your resume, your resume doesn't really matter that much anyway. It's your personality and the way you're being evaluated in an interview. It's about how you're coming across answering those questions. So there is really no point of being over exaggerating in a resume. Write the things you're comfortable with and tell a story. And I would say bold out the things that you want readers' eyes to go on. So if there's a deal that you worked on that was $3 million, I would bold out the 3 million. If you were the first SE in an organization who helped write an enablement plan, bold out the first and the enablement plan on the resume. You get the point.
Yeah, and use exact numbers. If it's a 3 million and $1, put 3 million and one. Don't say 4 million, because that's another exaggeration right there. So you have it broken down into 3 areas. Do you want to dig into a couple of different areas of each of those? I mean, people can go in. There's going to be a link in the show notes. But when you say sales, we're not just talking about sales people. Sales engineers are part of sales, so it could be non-technical conversations with sales engineers as well, right? Okay. So what is if you were to think of 2 questions that you would want to ask them, what would that be?
There's about 10 questions for sales. When I say sales, first of all, I mean account reps and their bosses, their managers, a person who does not work for the SE org, the person who's responsible for revenue, whoever that person is, right? That is what I'm talking about.
Okay.
I would the most important question I would ask them is straight up, like, what is the hardest part of your product to sell and what's the easiest? Because that is a very open-ended question.
Yeah.
And that can lead you to a lot of other questions. About or what do you see as the biggest challenge in the territory you're selling in? I've asked this question many times. Like, hey, in New York, what do you see as the biggest challenge to meeting your number? It's very relevant. They are always thinking about their numbers. They're always thinking about their quotas, and they're always thinking about how am I going to sell and make this number. So chances are, even if they've been instructed to not be overly negative or divulge any details, you have hit a nerve there, because a sales rep's job is to always make sure they are making their numbers. If there's a confident rep who is making their numbers, or a RD or a CRO, they're making their numbers, they will have no problem answering this question. Like, oh yeah, we have our pipeline. Our pipeline is huge. The product is great. The biggest challenge we have is perhaps the good response to this question would be, the biggest challenge we have is we don't have enough SEs. That's a good response. All right. The questionable responses, I think that's another article here as to maybe I'll write out what are the responses that are red flags to these questions. So in those sense, I would say that the response you're not looking for is, well, I mean, there's a lot of bugs in the product, or we don't have engineering. we need to hire more R&D. What that means is
They don't
there's
have a good
certainly
product.
exactly the
Yeah.
product has an issue, and you as an SE, guess what, will have to answer questions around those issues. So those are the kind of responses that would be very off.
I like to ask, like, over the last 3 years, how many times did you hit your quota?
Yes.
I flat out asked that question, and I don't generally need an answer. I can tell by their face if it's good or bad, right? It's like, okay, all right. I guess you don't hit your quota. All right, thank you for answering that question for me. And, you know, because it's not a deal breaker for me if they haven't hit their quota. Like it's not a good feeling not to hit your quota, but that means I'm gonna need to negotiate higher on the base.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So.
Smart.
And all these questions that you're asking, they're not deal breakers per se. It's just, it means it's a challenge that you're going to have to negotiate one way, shape, or form, or you have to go in informed so that you don't blame anybody else for lying to you, because it's basically your job to discover these things. It's a discovery process.
Exactly. And I would assume that at any point you're at least interviewing in two places, so that it also kind of gives you more confidence when you go in to negotiate. If you only have one offer, your chances are, you don't have much leverage to negotiate. The moment you have another offer, even the hiring manager knows that they need to close, or they're going to lose you. And that is when you compare notes to these questions and make sense as to, all right, where will I have the most, I would say the best time as an SE? Where would I need to grow more? That's when you compare these notes.
Yeah. And the thing is, so I've seen people who interview just because a recruiter called them. They're like, all right, fine, I'll interview. And that means they have just one interview in the pipeline. But if you're seriously looking for a job, getting a job is like sales. You're going to have a funnel. You're going to have to have leads. You're going to have to apply to a lot of jobs and then funnel it down. That way you can choose where you want to go, and where you want to go is not chosen for you. So.
Absolutely.
All right. So you mentioned that you're talking below for the SE measurements and growth. These are the questions you ask after you get a verbal offer or something like that. What are some questions that you would ask a sales engineer manager early on in the interview cycle?
I think I'm just trying to see if I first of all, do I get along with this person? Because this person will be my boss. So I think the first conversation is, let me just talk to them and see how easy they are to talk to, whether I'm getting along or not. How passionate are they about their company that they're working for? Does this person look like someone who I can kind of work with under pressure? Those are the things I'm kind of evaluating early on. And then the basic questions around, how many SEs do you have on your team? How many reps do they report? Do they kind of support? And what kind of enablement plans do you have?
Can we pause there about like the number of SEs? How would that affect your decision if like they have 20 SEs under them versus 10?
I personally think that as an SE who is kind of been in the field, if your manager has more than kind of 8 people reporting, like if your manager has more than 8 people they're managing, it's going to be hard for you to find that one-on-one time with them for your own career growth, right? I think 8 to maybe 10 is an optimal number, but you should know that going in. It's not that they don't want to help you. It's just that it's just not possible as an SE manager managing a team more than 10 or 20. 10, like if they have like say 20 people, right? It's going to be hard for them to kind of manage everyone individually.
Well, yeah, and 100%. And the way I see it is that if they have 20 people, they're just paper pushers at that point. They're just approving vacations, approving expenses. That's all the time, and doing like performance reviews. That's pretty much all the time that they have. The exceptional ones will try to make time and meet and help and lead, but there's only so much time in the world, and they need to have some life work balance as well.
And you know what, they are just they are like us. I mean, they all have families, and they need to be in the right mental state as well in order to be a good manager. I think we all can agree that each one of us make better decisions when we are mentally healthy as well, and to have that balance. And that's why we all talk about work-life balance so much. because we need to be in the right headspace to make the best decisions for our employers.
So let's say an SE manager has 20 people and the interviewee still likes the job. Is there anything that they can do to make sure that they have that one-on-one time, or like a way to alleviate any non-leadership capabilities of that SE leader?
I think that's a good question. Look, if you are really passionate about that product, and if you're really passionate about the future of that company, and you do see yourself maybe growing, I would say if I'm an SE, I would straight up ask my manager, like, hey, listen, like, I really love the product. I really believe in your company, and I did have a question that, how do you manage 20 people? How do you get the time? Straight up ask them. Get out of your comfort zone and become a human being and a friend rather. And that's going to really leave a mark on your hiring manager, because you're coming across as somebody who has empathy and who has a concern for them as well. And then maybe say that, are you guys planning to, maybe hire another manager? If not, what is the path to maybe being a leader at the current company? There is no leader that I can think of that's going to look at that question and think worse of you. They're only going to say, this person has empathy. He really cares about not just his job, but my job. And they might make a good leader. And honestly, if somebody is coming in and saying they can ease my job and kind of take half of it, I would only be their supporter. I wouldn't be against them.
I like to ask the question in these situations, like, all right, so you have 20 people. What can the new SE that you hire come in and do to actually help you or alleviate some pain off of you? Right?
That is what yes, very good.
Like, I would ask your question and then follow up with this question. Just keep in mind that it's a conversation, right? Like, right. Honestly, what you said triggered my question. If you hadn't said what you said, it would not have triggered my question. But the more you talk to people and be genuinely curious, the easier the questions will come. And what I tell people, like, what do you really want to know? These are the questions you ask. In some cases, they don't know what they want to know, and we kind of need to guide them. But when you're having conversations, what do you want to know about that human being in front of you, not just the manager, the person?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I always ask is, how can I come in and make the biggest impact as an SE, right? In your team, on your team. So I would ask this question to this person as well, like, what's your recommendation? What's your advice? It also kind of adds into the first like 30-day plan, 60-day plan kind of deal. But yeah, how can I come in and make the biggest impact?
Yeah, I like that also, like a similar type of question you had under your sales questions you would ask, and kind of seeing like, yeah, how can I make the biggest difference in the next 90 days or whatever it is? And the cool thing with that too, regardless of who you're speaking to, let's just say within the context of a sales team that maybe has multiple people that gives you different answers, is that especially as an SE, I mean, I'm also thinking about this more as an SE going into a role as one of the first SEs in a role versus being part of an established team. But the nice thing about that question is that it almost gives you a nice little path forward as to exactly what you should do. So if you're kind of in the dark as to what you should do to kind of build yourself up at this new organization, these people are going to tell you pretty much exactly what they expect of you. And even if they're not things that you are going to be able to do right away in the first 90 days, because different people say different things, it gives you a plan as to knowing, okay, like these people expect this type of thing from this SE function, and I can maybe try to mold those expectations into however I do my job one way or another. So I don't know, I love that question because it definitely did me well when I first got started.
One of the important questions that I ask the hiring managers, who do they report to? Or like, what's the structure like? Because I've worked where I reported directly to the sales director, not a great sales director, great guy, not a great SE leader, because they're focused on something else. And I've worked where the SE reports to the SE manager, who then reports to the director. And you end up being the same thing. And you can tell how important that role is for the company by how separate the tree is, how the SE tree is separate from the sales tree. If you end up with the VP of SE's VP of sales reporting to the CRO, you know they're equally important. And the lower the tree gets together, you know it's less important. So and I learned that from my experience with I would never have thought of it before until I worked for a sales director directly. So,
Right.
all right. So let's talk about product. Like I have not met with product people during interviews. Most of my conversations happen to be with SEs, SE managers, directors, sales directors, and salespeople. So you have an experience that I'm not exposed to, where you worked with product and enablement. What kind of experience was that like?
Yeah, it was a smaller startup I was interviewing for. I have met with the product, and when I say product, it doesn't have to be a PM or not a product manager. I have met product managers for interviews. I've also met like a senior engineer who worked on the product, who was evaluating SEs because the company only had like one or two other SEs. So it really, that's what I meant by product and enablement. Sometimes you would also meet a senior or a staff SE who knows as much about the product as one of the senior engineers, right?
Right.
So what I mean is really technical folks. Sometimes I've also once met a person from the SE enablement
Okay.
team. They call it what, like sales readiness, or they're different teams. So overall, like whoever you're meeting, whether it's a staff solutions engineer, a software engineer, or a product manager who knows about the product, their job might be to evaluate you on technical capabilities and technical readiness of the product. So that's what I mean by questions around product.
Okay.
And these questions mostly deal with answering the question of, is this product worth selling and kind of me learning from scratch, or will I have a hard time convincing others? If you can convince me that this is a robust product which kind of solves a challenge and a problem, then how am I going to convince others and meet my quota? So that is what I'm trying to get at, right? When I'm asking questions around product, one of the most important questions here is documentation. We as SEs know how many times, even during a call, I've gone to a documentation and answered a question. You improvise as an SE, you improvise in your career. And some of the questions like, hey, do you guys support HIPAA compliance? Boom, 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 dot. Yes, we
What
do.
is HIPAA?
It's
Yeah, no, you don't need to answer that question, but I'm just saying that's why you switch.
It's exactly, it's a regulatory basically a law here. Can you guys hear me? My
We hear you. You're just frozen a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, like on top of that too, I think you both kind of mentioned it yourselves as well, but just the idea of like a little echo there. Just as a product person, or rather as an SE, I guess maybe more so for a smaller organization. I've only really had the privilege of working for smaller ones. So like getting a feel for the product people, is the product a good product? But as that technical salesperson, you're often, especially if you're one of the few, you're often like on the front lines, I suppose, to issues either that the market has for the product or otherwise just bugs that the product has that came up during demos. And so you have to be really good at working with, or at least in my experience, had to be really good at working with product management to identify those, get those things fixed. If there are commits that have to do with a new customer signing on, you have to have a good relationship with product to get those things through, at least in my experience anyways. And just looking at these questions, had I asked these prior to ever getting hired, just to the product team, yeah, what great insight it would have given to just kind of maybe knowing what that experience would have been like even before actually getting into it. So yeah, I really like that angle on it as well.
Out of
Wonderful.
curiosity, have you ever looked at interviewing a customer about the company you're applying to, or you're getting close to working for?
Look, I mean, if I go in my LinkedIn and I know someone who's connected or has common connections with the hiring manager, and that happened to be like a customer, I can I can certainly ask them from a friend's perspective. But no, I don't really go to the customer. Might not be a bad strategy. My only thing is, if you end up getting the job and the customer tells them, oh, hey, he asked me, but I don't know how that's perceived. But and the other thing is, a lot of times you don't know which customer has worked with which SE. You can find all that out, but yeah, might not be a bad strategy. I've not done it.
Yeah, so I haven't done it either. I've done it unofficially because because of the territory I work in, we know everybody anyways. But like, no, like they ask us for referrals, right? And
Yeah.
it's just a thought. I have no proof whatsoever. So if anybody wants to try it at your own risk. But why can't we ask them for referrals? I guess that's a philosophical question for another time.
You
But yeah.
can. There's nothing stopping you. One other thing I would say that I have thought about, and I actually did it once. Look at your colleagues and your future colleagues and future hiring managers LinkedIn. See where they were working in the last company, and communicate or talk to someone from that last company in that same territory or region. You can you can have a call with them, because the chances are when they leave that company, that person will be more that person will be more free to share that, right? That knowledge.
But yeah, so yeah, I hear there's like a law in the US about referrals. If someone calls in and for like someone calls you and you give a bad referral about that person, you might get sued. So just keep that in mind when you're talking to people about people, I guess. I don't know.
And if somebody has put your name on a referral, chances are you're friends with that person, or you've already asked permission, or you're on good terms. You're not going to put a referral who's going to badmouth you on
I've seen it both ways, but if you are putting a referral, make sure they don't they're a good referral, not someone you burned a bridge with.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so this is a great list, and the thing about this list is that you're asking it for your own benefits, but it also shows that you care. And hiring managers want people who ask questions, because that's part of our job. If we're not asking questions, 3/4 of our job is just not done. So make sure to ask questions. It'll make you look good too. And don't be afraid to ask these questions. I would just say, any final advice about like the interview process, or at least asking questions to the people listening?
Applying for a job is a tedious process. And getting a job is a huge decision. It is reversible for sure, but you are really going to be spending a lot of time at your new job. It's going to take up a lot of your everyday time, and if you end up in a bad company, that's going to affect your personal life, your mental health, and maybe confidence for future jobs and whatnot. So all in all, this is a serious decision, and for any serious decision, you really need to do your homework, pros and cons. You need to measure those. So have an open mind when you're looking for jobs, and do your research. Put in the time and effort to really understand the company that you're applying for, research the people that you're going to be talking to, and please write down the questions that you have prepared based on that research before you ask them. Because any interview that you're going to have, the last 5 minutes, even the first one, least is how much that, sometimes they give you even 15 minutes. They will ask you, what are the questions you have for us? And if at that point your questions are, what's a normal day like? Oh, how's your work-life balance? Or things that are very generic, you haven't really differentiated yourself amongst other candidates, because everyone else is asking the same questions. So again, I will ask you, how will you differentiate and become the top SE during that interview cycle? And one of the ways to do that is pointed questions, and questions that really show, as Ramsey said, that you care. And if you're asking, if you're, for example, dating someone, for instance, and you're going on a first or second date, if that person is not asking you questions about you, they're not really interested, right? Same with your partner, same with anyone else. Asking questions that are pointed, and kind of when you're listening as well, show you that a person cares. And have that attitude when you're going in a job interview, um, and it's only going to help you make that decision.
All right. It's a great way to end the show. So I'm curious if we should do the not so fire round or not. What do you think, Akshat? Do you want to do that, or should we just end here? Okay, let's do that. So we've done this once before, you and I. It seems that whenever we talk, we just go over because everything's interesting. So we'll do it in a fire round succession. These are the same 4 questions we ask almost every guest, and usually Benny starts us off.
All right. Yeah, no, so you gave a lot of really good insights about all sorts of things. Goodness, how should we ask this? How about, what do you love about interviews?
Nothing.
Just interviews. I know you said it's tedious. What do you love about it? If you love anything about it.
Meeting new people and seeing what they will ask me. Like Vinayak, I'm meeting you first time. It's kind of an interview, and I was like, all right, it's going to be fun. And that's not for everyone, right? Not everyone likes meeting new people. Not everyone is an extrovert. I think with me, I don't have any fear of meeting new people, and it kind of excites me, to be honest.
Nice.
Yeah,
Awesome.
there is an adrenaline rush to it. It's kind of like sales engineering. You're solving a problem. It's just you're the product this time, and even if you're full of bugs, you're still solving the problem. All right. So the question number 2 is, what would you change about the interview process? And we only have 5 minutes.
That's a tough question, and 5 minutes might not be. I would honestly. It depends on what I'm hiring for. For an SE, I would really remove a lot of the technical and the behavioral questions that don't really apply directly to my job. And maybe if that means that the first call is a hiring manager call and not the recruiter call, maybe that can happen. I would actually do the technical round first, followed by a quick sales round before we can proceed. So I think part of being an SE, the first thing is you need to have the technical bar, some basic bar that you're selling. So a lot of companies do the do I would say the sales part first. So I would keep it to the technical part first. It really depends, Ramzi, what I need to change. So if I'm interviewing for for a company that sells a very technically challenging product, I would have a different process. So this is a tough question for me. I think I look at the product, and I look at who I need for this, and see what's the best way to approach it. I would focus on networking and kind of getting those people rather than cold resumes, right? That's always helpful.
Yeah. Nice. All right, cool. Benny, question number 3.
Yes, sir. So definitely going to include your list, your article here in our show notes, just because there's so much great things there, not only for experienced SEs, but also for new ones as well, or budding ones too. But what are some other resources you may recommend for people that either want to improve their interviewing abilities, or maybe their discovery process as part of their interview process? What direction would you point them in?
I think I no plug for SENY, but we actually did a live event as to how can you get hired as an SE. There's a lot of good. It's on our site, past events. So there's a whole playlist. Definitely, that's a good quick thing to watch. But knowing about what entails being an SE, right? You have John Kerr, his book Mastering Technical Sales, Chris White, 6 Habits of an SE, and Robert Reifstahl, Demo to Win. I think if you take some pieces from all 3 of those, you will at least understand what is the sales process, right? What are the challenges that SEs run into? There's a whole thing on demo crimes that Bob Reifstahl talks about, for example. So really, I would take the snippets from those resources. Plus, you have the opportunity to really talk to an established SE. Find channels, like even they can reach out to, I hope, Ramzi and you, Bini, and ask you guys. So interviewing people, going and doing your due diligence, asking people who have been there questions. Hey, look, I'm interviewing for this company. What's your recommendation? Or For SENY, we have, if you join SENY and SE Nation's Slack, there's a mentors channel. You can message anyone and kind of find mentors. Those are the things I would recommend.
Nice. All right, last question of the not so fire round, not related to interviewing, related to Akshat specifically. Is there a habit that you're working on today to improve either as a sales engineer or in life in general?
For sure. I think I'm always trying to improve on my prioritization skills. How do I not juggle 10 things, right? I have this habit of starting 10 things at a time, right? Oh, I got to do this. Oh, but before I finish it, let me just do that. Such a horrible strategy. And not that I want to do it. It just happens without you even thinking. Because while you're in SE, while you're working on one thing, somebody will ping you and there will be 10 other things. So advice is don't do 10 things at a time. Prioritize and do one at a time. Otherwise, you're really going to struggle.
Maybe the habit should be going offline while you're working on one thing, because that is a problem that I have. Like I already went on a rant about multitasking, right? It's not real. And when you're working on something and someone pings you, it's like, hey Ramsey, something urgent. My customer needs this in like 10 days. I'm like, all right, okay. It's not urgent, but since you pinged me already, distracted me, let me work on it. And then, all right, what was I doing?
I would turn off my phone. My phone is not within my reach right now because of this call. That's the one thing that I'm really proud of. Second is I would turn off my notifications also for like chatting while I'm on a very important meeting.
Yeah, well, I'm like, I go offline for like an hour or two a day, or at least I try to, just to get some work done. Otherwise, I will not get any work done, and then I'll end up working really, really late. Anyways, all right. So last question of the day, where can people reach out to connect with you, Akshat?
Absolutely. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can join salesengineersny.com/sign up and join our Slack and ping me on our Slack at any time. I have that on my phone, so I get a notification. Easiest way to reach me. But those two are the easiest ways to reach me.
Awesome. Well, it was great talking to you, Akshat, and hope to do that again real soon.
Thank you so much, Ramsey. Thank you so much, Benny. Always a pleasure talking to you guys. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you took something from it. So if you're trying to become a sales engineer, you have to start thinking like a sales engineer, and you have to know you want to qualify yourself in and out of certain opportunities, as in like certain job opportunities. You want to understand more about what they do and how they do it, what they think and how they think, room to grow, room not to grow. Are you going to enjoy working with the salespeople that are there? Are you going to enjoy reporting to that manager? So you have a lot of questions to ask. We talked about some of them here. A lot of them are on the blog. So go check it out. And if you are looking for some coaching, like the other folks that I'm working with, reach out, let me know, and we can talk about it. So that's it for me. With that, this is Ramsey signing off.